I never thought I would be telling this story. The story of how my life was turned upside down, how love turned to pain and trust turned to ashes. My name is Tony, and this is the story of how I learned of my wife Millie's betrayal and our children's silent complicity. Our story began as a fairy tale. Millie and I met in high school, and she was the kind of girl every guy dreams of. Beautiful, smart, and with a terrific sense of humor. Our relationship developed rapidly, and a year after graduation we got married. We were young, in love, and confident that together we could overcome any difficulties. The first years of our marriage were filled with happiness and mutual understanding. We both started working right after we got married. I got a job as a mechanic at a local car service, and Millie got a job as a supermarket clerk. It was not an easy job, but we were enthusiastic and dreamed of a better future. Soon we had children, first Emily, and 3 years later Jake. Our family seemed perfect. We were an example of love and harmony for many, but as they say, there are devils in a quiet pool. I had no idea that behind the facade of our happy family life there was something terrible. Now, looking back, I see the first signs that something went wrong, but then I was blind, fully trusting my wife and children. It started with little things. Millie started staying late after work more often, talking about some extra shifts and new responsibilities. I rejoiced at her successes, proud that my wife was so responsible in her work. How naive I was. Emily, our oldest daughter, was 15 at the time and Jake was 12. I noticed that the kids were becoming more withdrawn, especially when it came to Mom. But I chalked it up to adolescence, to their natural desire for more privacy. If only I'd known how much weight they were carrying on their young shoulders. My first serious suspicions began about a year ago. Millie started checking her cell phone more often, always keeping it with her. One day I happened to see her quickly put her phone away when I entered the room. A strange expression flashed across her face, a mixture of guilt and annoyance. But when I asked if everything was okay, she smiled and said she was just tired at work. I tried to push the gloomy thoughts away from me. After all, we had a beautiful family. We loved each other, and we had wonderful children. How could I have imagined that it could all come crashing down in an instant? But as time went on, the more I noticed a change in Millie's behavior. She became more irritable, snapping at me about little things. Our conversations became shallow. We spent less and less time together. When I tried to talk to her about it, she always made excuses. Stress at work, fatigue, health problems. I tried to be an understanding husband. I tried to help more around the house, spend more time with the kids to give Millie a chance to rest. But the more I tried, the further she seemed to drift away from me. Emily and Jake had changed too. They started spending more time in their rooms, avoiding family dinners together. When I tried to talk to them, they were silent or turned the conversation to other topics. I sensed something was wrong, but couldn't figure out what it was. One evening, when Millie was late at work again, I decided to talk to the kids. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I had made their favorite pizza. "Guys," I said, "you know you can tell me anything that's bothering you, right? I see you've been kind of sad lately. Did something happen at school?" Emily and Jake looked over at me. I saw fear in their eyes, and something else I couldn't recognize at the time. Emily, being the older one, took the lead. "Dad, it's okay. It's just a lot of homework and tests at school. Don't worry about it." But I sensed that wasn't the whole truth. "Are you sure?" I insisted. "You know I'm always on your side no matter what happens, right?" Jake suddenly stood up from the table. "Dad, can I go to my room? I still have homework to do," he said, avoiding my gaze. I nodded, feeling the lump in my throat grow. Something was definitely wrong, and that something was destroying our family from the inside out. After Jake left, I tried one more time to talk to Emily. "Honey," I began softly, "I can see that something is bothering you. You know you can tell me anything, right?" Emily was silent for a long time, looking down at her plate. When she finally looked up, I saw tears in her eyes. "Dad, I can't. I'm sorry," she whispered, and ran out of the kitchen. I was left sitting alone, surrounded by unfinished pizza and the heavy silence of our home. Something was destroying my family, and I felt completely helpless. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. Millie came home late, saying there was unscheduled inventory at the store. She went to bed without even kissing me, as she had done before. I lay in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, and felt the chasm growing between us. The next day, I decided to act. I couldn't live in ignorance any longer, couldn't watch my family disintegrate. I decided to follow Millie after work. The next day, I woke up with a heavy heart. The thought that there was something wrong with my family kept me uneasy, but I decided not to jump to conclusions and try to figure things out calmly. I went to work at the car service as usual. All day I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept coming back to Millie and the kids. Jim, my boss, noticed my condition. "Hey, Tony, are you okay?" he asked when I dropped the wrench for the third time. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, trying to smile. "Just didn't sleep well." Jim shook his head. "Look, if you need to leave early, I understand. You're one of my best mechanics, but you're not yourself today." I nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Jim. I'll finish up with this car, and I think I'll go home." Returning home earlier than usual, I found Emily doing her homework in the kitchen. She looked up in surprise when I walked in. "Dad, you're early today." "Yeah, decided to take the day off," I replied, taking off my jacket. "Where's Jake?" "At a friend's doing a history project." Emily went back to her notes, but I noticed her nervously biting her pencil, a habit she only had when she was worried about something. I sat down next to her. Is everything okay with you? You seem a little tense." Emily shrugged, not looking up. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a lot of homework." I knew she wasn't telling me the whole truth, but I decided not to press. Instead, I asked, "Isn't Mom back yet?" "No, she texted to say she'd be late for work," Emily replied, and I thought I heard a hint of bitterness in her voice. I felt my insides tighten. Millie had been working late a lot lately, too often. "Okay, then let me make dinner," I said, standing up. "What would you like?" Emily finally looked up and smiled weakly. "Maybe spaghetti?" "Spaghetti is so spaghetti." I rubbed her head and went into the kitchen. As I cooked dinner, I tried to piece together everything that was bothering me. Millie had become distant. The kids were somehow depressed. The house no longer felt the warmth and coziness that had always been our pride. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. When the spaghetti was ready, Jake came back. He looked tired and somehow lost. "Hey, son," I said hello. "How was work on the project?" "Fine," he mumbled, tossing his backpack into a corner. "Dinner's ready. Are you hungry?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. Jake shrugged. "Not really. I'd better go to my place. I still have some things to finish up." I exchanged glances with Emily. She looked just as worried as I was. "Jake," I called out when he was already halfway up the stairs. "Are you sure you're okay? You know you can tell me if something's wrong, right?" Jake stopped but didn't turn around. "It's okay, Dad. Really." With those words, he went upstairs, and a minute later, I heard the door of his room slam shut. Emily and I ate dinner in silence. I tried to strike up a conversation a few times, but she answered one-wordedly, clearly immersed in her own thoughts. After dinner, I did the dishes, and Emily went to her room, saying she needed to finish her homework. I was left alone in the living room, feeling completely lost. It was almost 10 p.m. when I heard the front door open. Millie walked in, looking tired, but somehow lively. "Hi," she said when she saw me. "I'm sorry I'm so late. There was an unscheduled inventory." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to express everything that had built up, to ask directly what was going on. But the other part was afraid to hear the answer. "Are the kids asleep yet?" Millie asked, taking off her coat. "Yeah, they went to their room a couple hours ago," I replied. "Millie, we need to talk." She froze for a moment, but then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course we do, darling. But maybe not tonight? I'm very tired, and I have to get up early tomorrow." I felt a wave of frustration and anger rising inside, but I suppressed it. "All right, but we have to talk. Soon." Millie nodded and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before leaving to go upstairs. I was left sitting in the living room, feeling the walls of our house seem to shrink around me. The next morning, I woke up early. Millie had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen table. Left early. Need to get the store ready for the regional manager's arrival. Don't expect me for dinner. Kisses, M. I stared at that note, feeling the lump in my throat grow. When did we start communicating with notes? When did we stop talking in the mornings over a cup of coffee, discussing the day's plans? Emily and Jake came down for breakfast, both looking sleep-deprived and depressed. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "How about some pancakes for breakfast?" The kids nodded without much enthusiasm. While I made breakfast, I tried to make conversation, asking about their plans for the day, about school, about friends, but I only got one-word answers in return. When the pancakes were ready, we sat down at the table. I decided it was time for a serious conversation. "Guys," I began, trying to speak calmly, "I know something's not right lately. I can see that both of you are upset about something. Please tell me what's going on." Emily and Jake looked over at me. In their eyes, I saw fear and guilt. "Dad," Emily finally began, her voice shaking. We can't." "Why?" I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "You know you can tell me anything." Jake suddenly stood up from the table. "I'm sorry, Dad, I don't want to talk about it." He ran out of the kitchen, and a few seconds later I heard the front door slam. Emily sat with her head down. I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. I reached out and took her hand. "Please tell me what's going on. I can see that you and Jake are hurting. I want to help." Emily looked up at me with eyes full of pain. "Dad, I can't. Mom, she said if we told you, it would ruin our family." I felt the ground go from under my feet. What was it that Millie could have said to the children that made them suffer so much? And why had she forbidden them to tell me? "Emily," I tried to speak as softly as possible. "Whatever happens, we'll get through this together. I promise." But Emily shook her head. "I'm sorry, Dad, I can't." With those words, she too ran out of the kitchen. I was left sitting at the table surrounded by unfinished pancakes and a heavy silence. Something was destroying my family from the inside out, and I felt completely helpless. In that moment, I decided that I could no longer sit idly by. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it took. But how? How do I find out what my own wife and children were hiding from me? I picked up the phone and called work, telling Jim I was taking the day off for family reasons. Then I got in my car and drove to the supermarket where Millie worked. I knew what I was about to do was wrong, but I could no longer see any other way out. Parking in front of the supermarket, I waited. The hours dragged agonizingly slow. I watched Millie working at the cash register, smiling at the customers. She looked so ordinary, so normal, like our family wasn't falling apart. Around 3 in the afternoon, I saw Millie leaving the store. But instead of walking to her car, she headed toward a small cafe across the street. I waited a few minutes and followed her. As I entered the cafe, I saw Millie sitting at a table in the corner. She was alone, a cup of coffee in front of her, and she was typing something quickly into her phone. I was about to walk over to her when she suddenly smiled, looking at the screen. At that moment, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Emily. "Dad, where are you? Jake and I are home and we need to talk." I looked at Millie again. She continued typing, completely engrossed in her phone. Whoever was on the other end of this correspondence was clearly more important than her family. I quietly walked out of the cafe and got into my car. My heart was torn between wanting to know the truth and needing to be there for my children. In the end, I decided to drive home. No matter what Millie was hiding, the kids needed me now. When I got home, Emily and Jake were waiting for me in the living room. They looked scared and determined at the same time. "Dad," Emily began, her voice shaking, "there's something we need to tell you." When I got home, Emily and Jake were waiting for me in the living room. Their faces were serious, and I knew immediately that there was going to be a difficult conversation to have. I slowly lowered myself into the chair across from them, feeling the tension in the room build with every second. Emily started first, her voice shaking with excitement. She apologized for the fact that she and Jake had been distant lately, ignoring my attempts to talk. Jake nodded, supporting his sister, his usually carefree expression replaced by a grimace of guilt. They'd told me how they'd noticed a change in Millie's behavior a few months ago. At first, it was small things. She started checking her phone more often, staying late at work, canceling family plans at the last minute. But gradually, these changes became more and more noticeable. Emily shared how she'd once heard her mom talking on the phone in a whisper late at night. Jake added that several times he'd seen Millie quickly close tabs on the computer when someone entered the room. I listened to them, feeling the anxiety growing inside me. All these details the kids were noticing were adding up to a disturbing picture. But I tried to stay calm, not wanting to scare Emily and Jake even more. The kids admitted that Millie had asked them not to tell me about her strange behavior. She said she had a surprise for the whole family, and she didn't want to ruin it. But the longer this went on, the more Emily and Jake began to have doubts. Jake, usually so reserved, suddenly burst into tears. He said he felt like a traitor, keeping something from me. Emily hugged her brother, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks too. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to be angry at the kids for keeping quiet for so long, but I understood the difficult situation they were in. They loved us both and didn't want to become the cause of conflict. I walked over to the couch and put my arms around both of them. We sat like that for a while, just holding each other. I could feel the tension of the last few weeks slowly letting go of them. When everyone had calmed down a bit, I decided it was time for a frank conversation. I asked the kids if there was anything else they wanted to tell me about Millie's behavior. Emily and Jake looked at each other, and I could see the struggle in their eyes. Emily finally made up her mind and told me about the few times she had seen her mom leaving a coffee shop near her work. That information in itself wasn't suspicious, but Emily noticed that Millie always seemed very agitated after those visits. Jake added that once, when he'd taken his mom's laptop to do his homework, he'd accidentally seen a page open with job postings in another city. When he asked his mom about it, she quickly closed the page and said it was for a friend. I listened to them, feeling the anxiety growing inside me. All these details, which individually might have seemed insignificant, added up to a disturbing picture. But I tried not to show my anxiety to the children. Instead, I thanked them for their honesty and bravery. I told them that I understood how hard it was for them to keep it all together, and that I was proud of them for choosing to talk to me. We had a long discussion about what all of this could mean. The kids voiced their theories. Maybe Mom is having problems at work, or is she planning some big surprise for the whole family? I tried not to suppress their ideas, even though I was growing convinced inside that the reality could be much darker. I assured Emily and Jake that I would talk to Millie and try to find out what was going on. I promised them that whatever problems arose between me and their mom would in no way affect our love for them. After that conversation, the atmosphere in the house changed. Emily and Jake became more open, coming up to me more often to talk or just to be near me. I felt that our bond had strengthened, despite all the difficulties. However, the problem with Millie remained. I didn't know how to approach this conversation. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand an explanation, but the other part was afraid to hear the truth, whatever it might be. I watched Millie for a few days, trying to find confirmation of the children's words, and indeed, I noticed a change in her behavior. She became more distracted, often immersed in her own thoughts. Several times I caught her at the computer, and she would quickly close some windows when I entered the room. One evening, when the kids had already gone to bed, I decided it was time for a serious conversation. I found Millie in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, staring at her phone. When I walked in, she quickly put it aside, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I sat down across from her and asked her bluntly if we were okay. Millie looked surprised, but quickly pulled herself together. She started talking about the stress at work, how tired she'd been lately, but I sensed she wasn't telling me the whole story. I told her about my observations and the conversation with the kids. I saw her tense up when I mentioned her secret phone conversations and strange outings. Millie tried to explain everything, but her excuses sounded unconvincing even to herself. At one point, she suddenly burst into tears. Through her tears, she talked about how lost she felt, how she felt like she had missed out on something important in her life. She confessed that she was really thinking about making some changes, but didn't know how to talk about it. I listened to her, feeling a mixture of relief and new anxiety. On the one hand, Millie had finally opened up to me, but on the other hand, her words hinted at a change that I wasn't ready for. We talked most of the night. Millie talked about her frustration with her job, her desire to try something new. She talked about how she missed the times when we were young and enthusiastic, when it seemed like the whole world was at our feet. I tried to understand her, to support her, though I still had doubts inside me. Why couldn't she have told me about this before? Why was it necessary to keep it a secret from me, but hint to the children? By morning, we had come to some semblance of agreement. I promised to support Millie in her desire for change, and she agreed to be more open with me and the kids. We decided that in the evening we would gather as a family and discuss our plans for the future. By the time I went to bed, it was getting light. Despite being tired, I felt relieved. It seemed that we had taken an important step toward rebuilding our family. But somewhere deep inside, there was still a restlessness. I couldn't shake the feeling that Millie was still hiding something from me. As I fell asleep, I thought about the upcoming conversation with my children. How would they react to the news of the possible changes in our lives? Would we be able to keep our family together despite the challenges? With these thoughts, I fell into a restless sleep, not realizing that the most difficult challenges were yet to come. The morning after our long talk with Millie began as usual. I woke up before her and went down to the kitchen to make breakfast for the whole family. As I fried scrambled eggs, my mind was spinning with thoughts of the upcoming evening conversation with the kids. How would we explain the situation to them? Would they understand Millie's desire to make a change in her life? Emily and Jake came down first. They looked a little wary, but I could see a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Apparently, our conversation last night had given them some relief. Millie joined us a little later, when the kids were finishing breakfast. She looked tired, but calm. The day passed in a kind of strange anticipation. At work, I couldn't concentrate, constantly thinking about the evening ahead. Jim, my boss, even asked if I was okay. I got off with generalities about family matters. When I got home, I found that Millie wasn't there yet. She'd sent a text saying she'd be late for work. Again. Despite our late-night conversation, this sent a wave of irritation through me. Doesn't she realize how important this evening is to our family? Emily and Jake noticed their mother's absence as well. I could see the disappointment on their faces, but I tried to stay positive. We cooked dinner together, trying to fill the awkward silence with talk about school and work. Millie came home just as we were finishing eating. She looked excited and a little confused. She apologized for being late and sat down at the table but refused to eat. I decided it was time to start a conversation. I explained to the kids that Mom and I had some difficulties, but we were working on resolving them. I told them about Millie's desire to change something in her life, perhaps change jobs or start a new hobby. Emily and Jake listened intently. I could see them looking at each other, as if they were silently communicating with each other. When I finished, Jake suddenly asked, "What about the man Mom is dating?" That phrase struck me like a bolt of lightning. I turned to Millie, expecting to see shock or outrage on her face. But instead, I saw relief? She took a deep breath and said, "Yes, we need to talk about this." The next few minutes passed like a blur. Millie calmly, almost nonchalantly, told me that she had been seeing another man for several months now. His name is Brian, and he works for the same supermarket chain, but in a different branch. I listened to her, feeling my world falling apart. All the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. The late returns, the secret calls, the changes in behavior. How could I have been so blind? Emily burst into tears and Jake jumped up from his chair, knocking it over. "How could you, Mom?" he shouted and ran out of the room. Emily followed him, throwing Millie a look of hurt and disappointment. The two of us were left alone in the kitchen. I looked at the woman I'd lived with for 16 years and didn't recognize her. Where was the loving, caring Millie I had once married? Why? Was all I could squeeze out of myself. Millie shrugged her shoulders. "I don't feel happy with you anymore, Tony. Not for a long time now. And instead of talking to me, you decided to change To destroy our family? Our family was destroyed by both of us. Her voice became harsher. You were so consumed with work that you didn't notice me drifting away from you. When was the last time you asked me how I felt? About my dreams? I couldn't believe my ears. You're blaming me? I worked to provide for our family, so that you and the kids could have everything you need. Money isn't everything, Tony. Millie stood up from the table. I needed more than that. Understanding, support, passion, all the things you couldn't give me. And you think this Brian guy is going to give you all that? I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. He's already giving, Millie replied with unexpected warmth in her voice. With him, I feel alive, wanted. He sees the real me, not just as a wife and mother. Her words hurt me deeper than I could have imagined. What about the children? Have you thought about them? Of course I've thought about them. Irritation came into her voice. But is it better if they grow up with unhappy parents? They'll understand. In time. I stared at her, not recognizing the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. So what now? You're going to go to him? Millie nodded. I've already packed my things. Brian is waiting for me. We've decided to start a new life in another city. You've already decided everything? Without even discussing it with me or the kids? I couldn't believe what was happening. What's there to discuss, Tony? Our marriage died a long time ago. I just found the courage to admit it and move on. Her indifference was killing me. How could she talk so calmly about the destruction of our family? About betraying me and the children? How can you be so cold? We've lived together for 16 years. We have 2 children. I felt tears coming to my throat. Millie sighed. Tony, understand. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I just want to be happy. Don't I deserve that? What about my happiness? Our children's happiness? Don't you care about that? Of course I care. But I can't live only for the sake of others. I'm entitled to my own happiness, too. I stared at her, trying to find a shred of regret or guilt in her eyes. But all I saw was determination and relief. You know what the worst part is, Millie? It's not that you cheated, it's the way you talk about it. Like it's normal. Like you're not ruining the lives of people who love you. She shook her head. You're being dramatic, Tony. People break up. That's life. Kids will get through it. You'll get through it. And you've already coped, haven't you? Just cut us out of your life? The bitterness in my voice was almost palpable. I will always love our children, and you'll always be a part of my life as their father. But our paths are diverging, Tony. It's time to face that. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned around. Emily and Jake were standing in the kitchen doorway, their faces wet with tears. Are you really leaving, Mom? Emily's voice shook. Millie walked over to the children, trying to hug them, but they pulled away. I'm really sorry about the way things turned out, but sometimes adults need to make tough decisions. I'll always love you, and we'll always see each other. Don't! Jake shouted. Don't say you love us! If you loved us, you wouldn't have left us! Millie looked shocked at her son's reaction. Jake, honey, you don't understand. No, you're the one who doesn't understand, Emily interjected. You're destroying our family. How can we trust you now? I could see Millie struggling to find the words to explain the situation to the kids. But what could she say? How to justify the betrayal? Listen, she began. I know you're hurting right now and you're mad at me. That's normal. But in time, you'll realize that sometimes people need to go their separate ways to be happy. What about our happiness? Emily asked. It doesn't bother you? I could see how those words hurt Millie. For a moment, her mask of indifference trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. Of course it cares. That's why I think it's best for everyone. You deserve happy parents, even if we're not together. Jake shook his head. You're selfish, Mom. Thinking only of yourself. Millie looked like she'd been punched. You'll understand when you're older. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Enough! I couldn't take it anymore. Stop making excuses, Millie. You made your choice. Now live with its consequences. She looked at me defiantly. That's exactly what I'm going to do, Tony. Live my life without regard for your expectations or judgment. Millie turned to the kids. I love you both. I hope one day you can understand and forgive me. With those words, she went upstairs. A few minutes later, she came down with a suitcase. I'll pick up the rest of my things later, she said as she stood in the doorway. And Tony, I'm sorry about everything. The door closed, and the three of us were left in a house that just yesterday seemed full of love and happiness. Emily burst into tears, tucking herself into my shoulder. Jake stood with his fists clenched, his eyes burning with anger and pain. I hugged the kids, feeling my own world crumbling. But I knew I had to be strong for them. We will make it through this. We have to make it through. What happens now, Dad? Emily asked through her tears. I took a deep breath. I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know one thing. We'll get through this together. We stood there for so long holding each other, trying to comprehend what had happened. Our lives had changed forever, and we had a long road of healing ahead of us. But in that moment, I vowed to myself that I would do everything I could to protect my children and help them through this betrayal. After Millie left, there was an oppressive silence in the house. Emily and Jake had gone to their rooms, and I was alone in the living room, trying to process what had happened. The shock of Millie's betrayal was slowly giving way to a sharp, piercing pain. I sat in the chair where I usually read the evening news and stared at the family photos on the wall. The happy faces, the smiles, the hugs all now seemed like cruel mockery. How could he not see that behind those smiles lurked a lie? Pain throbbed inside like an open wound. Each heartbeat echoed painfully, reminding me of the betrayal. I thought back to every moment of our life together, trying to find the signs I'd missed. Were there hints that Millie was unhappy? Was there anything I could have done to prevent it? Guilt came in waves. Maybe I really was working too hard? Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention to her? But does that justify cheating? Can you just cross off 16 years of life together like that? I remembered how we'd met in high school. Millie was the prettiest girl in the class, and I couldn't believe my happiness when she agreed to go out with me. Our love seemed so pure, so real. When we got married, I was sure it was forever. Now those memories hurt almost physically. Every happy moment of our life together was now poisoned by the realization of betrayal. Emily's birth, Jake's first steps, our family vacations, all of it now seemed fake, an elaborate setup that hid the bitter truth. I felt a lump come to my throat and tears sting my eyes. But I couldn't let myself cry. Not now, not when the kids needed me more than ever. Standing up from my chair, I walked over to the bar and pulled out the bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for special occasions. Well, if this isn't a special occasion, I don't know what would be, I thought bitterly as I poured myself a glass. The alcohol burned my throat, but it couldn't dull the ache inside. I stared out the window at the darkening sky, trying to figure out how we'd gotten to this point. How could the woman I loved more than life so easily throw away everything we had? Millie's indifference hurt even more than the fact of the betrayal itself. How could she talk so calmly about destroying our family? Did all those years mean nothing to her? I remembered her saying that she hadn't felt happy in a long time. Why hadn't she told me that before? Why didn't she give us a chance to make things right? Instead, she chose the path of lies and betrayal. Anger began to rise up inside of me, mixing with the pain. How could she do this to us? To the children? Emily and Jake didn't deserve this kind of betrayal. They trusted her, loved her unconditionally, and she just walked away, leaving them to deal with the consequences of her selfish decision. I thought about Brian, the man Millie had decided to start a new life with. Who was he? What was so special about him that made Millie give up everything we had? Part of me wanted to hate him, but I realized the real culprit was Millie. She made a choice. She had chosen to betray us. Suddenly, I heard a soft cry coming from Emily's room. My heart clenched with pain for my daughter. I put down the glass and went upstairs. Emily was lying on the bed with her face buried in the pillow. When I walked in, she raised her crying eyes to me. "Daddy, why did she leave us? Did we do something wrong?" Her voice shook with tears. I sat down next to her on the bed and hugged her. "No, sweetie. It wasn't anything you and Jake's fault. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and unfortunately, children suffer from those mistakes. But I want you to know that I'll always be there for you. Always. Emily pressed herself against me, and I felt her tears wet my shirt. We sat like that for a while, and I stroked her head, trying to comfort her. When Emily finally fell asleep, I quietly left her room and made my way to Jake's room. The door was closed, but there were muffled sounds coming from behind it. I knocked gently. "Jake, can I come in?" There was no answer, but I opened the door anyway. Jake was sitting on the floor with his back against the bed. There was a tattered picture in front of him, a family snapshot from our last vacation. I sat down next to him, not knowing what to say. Jake wasn't crying, but his eyes were full of pain and anger. "I hate her," he finally said in a hoarse voice. "Jake," I began, but he interrupted me. "No, Dad. You don't have to protect her. She betrayed us. She lied to us. She doesn't deserve our love." I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to agree with my son, to let the anger and resentment flow, but I knew it was wrong. "Son, I understand your feelings. Believe me, I'm angry and frustrated too. But hate is not the answer. It will only destroy you from the inside out." Jake looked at me in disbelief. "How can you be so calm? She left for another man. She left us." I felt the lump coming up to my throat again. "I'm not calm, Jake. I'm shattered. I'm hurting like I've never been hurt in my life, but I have to be strong. For you and Emily's sake." Jake was silent for a while, then suddenly put his arms around me. I felt his shoulders shake with sobs. All his ostensible calmness crumbled, and he finally let his emotions come out. We sat there for so long, father and son, united by our shared pain. I whispered words of comfort to him, though I didn't believe them myself. How can you comfort when your world is shattered? When Jake finally calmed down and fell asleep, I went back into the living room. The house seemed so empty, so alien without Millie's presence. Every corner reminded me of her, of our life together. I walked over to the bookcase and picked up our wedding album. When I opened it, I saw our happy faces. We were so young, so full of hope and plans for the future. Who would have thought it would end up like this? Leafing through the pages of the album, I could feel the pain inside getting stronger and stronger. Every photo, every moment of happiness captured now seemed like a mockery of fate. Reaching the last page, I came across an envelope. Inside was a note from Millie, written on our wedding day. "Tony, my love, today begins our lifelong journey together. I vow to love you, to be faithful to you, to support you in sorrow and in joy. You are my best friend, my soulmate, my other half. You make me feel whole. I am so happy I found you, and I can't wait to spend every day of our lives with you. Forever yours, Millie." The tears I had held back for so long finally broke through. I sobbed as I clutched that note in my hands, a symbol of promises that turned out to be empty words. How could that loving, devoted Millie turn into a woman who gave up on our family so easily? The pain was so intense that it felt like it would tear me from the inside out. I felt betrayed, used, thrown away for nothing. 16 years of life, all of our dreams, plans, hopes, all of it had been trampled, destroyed by one decision by Millie. I don't know how long I sat like that, giving vent to my grief. When the tears finally dried up, I felt drained dry. But with that came the realization that I had to be strong. For the children, for myself. Millie may leave. She may destroy our family, but she won't break us. We'll get through this betrayal. It will be hard, painful, but we have to move on. I looked at the clock. It was well past midnight. A new day would begin in a few hours, and with it a new chapter of our lives. A life without Millie. Picking myself up off the floor, I took one last look at our wedding photo, then resolutely closed the album and tucked it away in the far corner of the closet. The past would stay in the past. Now we had to learn to live again. I lay down on the couch, unable to bring myself to go up to the bedroom, where everything reminded me of Millie. I couldn't sleep. My mind was spinning with thoughts of the future. How will I explain the situation at work? What will I tell my friends, my neighbors? How will I help my children through this crisis? But in the midst of all these anxious thoughts, there was one firm decision. No matter what happens, I will not let this betrayal break us. We are stronger than Millie thinks. We'll make it. We'll make it through. We'll make it. With that thought, I finally fell into a restless sleep. Tomorrow begins a new day, and with it, our new life. A life full of challenges and hardships, but also opportunities for a fresh start. No lies, no betrayals, just the three of us, me, Emily, and Jake. Together we can get through this pain and become stronger. The morning after Millie left started out as a blur. I woke up on the couch with a headache and feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. For a moment I thought it was all just a nightmare, but reality quickly came back to me. I looked at the clock. It was almost 9 o'clock. The kids should have been in school an hour ago. Panic gripped me, and I jumped up from the couch, cursing myself for oversleeping. When I went upstairs, I found Emily and Jake still in their rooms. Emily was sitting on the bed, wrapping her arms around her knees and staring into the void. Jake was lying down, face buried in his pillow. "Guys," I called softly, "we need to get ready for school." Emily looked up at me, her eyes red with tears. "Dad, can we not go today? I can't." Jake didn't even move. I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to insist that they go to school, to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but I knew that would be too cruel. "Okay," I said finally. "You can stay home tonight, but tomorrow we'll have to go back to normal, okay?" Both of them nodded weakly. The day passed in a strange sort of daze. We tried to do the usual things, cleaning the house, watching TV, even trying to play board games. But it all seemed fake, as if we were playing parts in a bad play. In the evening, when the children had already gone to bed, I sat down at the computer. There were a lot of practical matters to take care of. I started making a list, call a lawyer, find out about the divorce procedure, check our finances, think about how to divide the property. Looking at this list, I felt a wave of fatigue and despair wash over me. How will I handle all of this alone? How would I explain to our friends, neighbors, colleagues what had happened? I opened my email half expecting to see a message from Millie, but there were only work emails and spam. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Her indifference hurt more than any words could say. Sitting in the darkness of the living room, I tried to imagine what our life would look like now. How would I handle working and raising the kids alone? How will I explain to Emily, when she first falls in love, that love can be beautiful despite what her mother did? How would I teach Jake to respect women when the most important woman in our lives had betrayed us so cruelly? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but I did know one thing. I had to be strong. For the kids, for myself. The next morning started too early. I barely slept at night, tossing and turning on the couch, replaying the events of the last few days in my head. After waking the kids, I started making breakfast. Emily came down first, her eyes swollen with tears. "Dad," she said quietly, "I don't want to go to school." I sighed. "I know, sweetheart. But we have to go on with our lives. We can't let what happened stop our lives." Jake appeared in the kitchen, looking as exhausted as his sister. "What if someone asks about Mom?" he asked, sitting down at the table. "You can tell the truth," I said, setting the plates of oatmeal in front of them. "Your parents split up. You don't have to go into details." Breakfast passed in silence. I watched the children struggle with their emotions, and my heart ached for them. When it was time to leave, I hugged them both. "Remember," I said, as I looked into their eyes, "no matter what happens, I will always be there for you. We will get through this together." After seeing the kids off to school, I drove to work. Jim, my boss, already knew about the situation. I had called him last night. "Tony," he said when he saw me, "are you sure you're ready to work?" I nodded. "I need something to do, Jim. I can't sit at home and think about this all day." He gave me an understanding pat on the shoulder and sent me off to the garage. The work helped distract me, but it couldn't completely dull the pain. Every time I looked at my wedding ring, I felt everything inside clench. On my lunch break, I took it off and put it in my pocket. It was time to start adjusting to the new reality. In the evening, after picking the kids up from school, I saw that they looked exhausted, but a little calmer than they had in the morning. Emily told me that her best friend had been very supportive. Jake was quiet the whole way home, but when we got there, he suddenly hugged me. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly, "for being with us." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I held them back. I had to be strong for them. We spent the evening together, cooking dinner and discussing how the day had gone. No one mentioned Millie, but her absence was felt in every moment of silence, in every unspoken word. Before I went to bed, I checked my phone. No calls, no messages from Millie. Her silence was more eloquent than any words. She had truly walked out of our lives without looking back. As I lay in bed, I thought about what lay ahead of us. Tomorrow will be a new day, new challenges. But we will make it through. We have to. Because it's just the three of us now, and we have to stick together. It's been 3 months since Millie walked out of our lives. 3 long months filled with pain, anger, despair, but also moments of unexpected strength and togetherness. It's Saturday, and the kids and I decided to spend the day together at the park. This has become our new tradition. Every Saturday we do something together, whether it's going to a movie, having a picnic, or just going for a walk. It helps us feel like a family despite Millie's absence. As we spread out the plaid on the grass and began laying out our food, I noticed Emily staring pensively into the distance. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" I asked, handing her a sandwich. She sighed. "It's just weird, right? We're here, having fun, and Mom's not here. And it seems like we're okay?" I knew what she was talking about. The guilt that we could be happy without Millie still came over us sometimes. "It's okay, Em," I said softly. "We haven't forgotten Mom, but we're learning to move on. That's what she wanted, remember?" Jake, who had been chewing his sandwich in silence until then, suddenly spoke up. "Why do we have to do what she wanted? She didn't think about what we wanted when she left." I saw Emily tense up. The children's attitudes toward Millie's departure were different. Emily was still hoping for reconciliation, while Jake had completely shut himself off from his mother. "Jake," I began gently, "I understand your anger, but remember that your mom loves you, even if it doesn't seem like it right now." "If she loved us, she wouldn't have left," Jake mumbled, but without the heat he'd had before. We sat in silence for a while, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. I looked at my kids and felt both proud and hurt. They had matured so much in those 3 months, stronger than I could have imagined. But the price of that maturation was too high. "You know," I said finally, "I'm proud of both of you. You're handling all this so bravely." Emily smiled weakly and Jake just nodded. But I could see that my words had touched them. We spent the rest of the day playing frisbee and just enjoying the sunny weather. For the first time in a long time, I could hear the kids' genuine laughter and see them running carefree in the grass. It gave me hope that we could overcome this pain. That evening, when we got home, I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. My heart jumped. Could it be Millie? But the voice in the message belonged to my lawyer. "Tony, this is Mark. I've received the papers from Millie's attorney. She's agreed to your terms of custody and property division. Call me when you can. We'll discuss the details." I felt a lump come up to my throat. It was so final. Millie was really walking out of our lives without even trying to fight for the kids. "Dad?" Emily's voice brought me out of my reverie. "Was that Mom?" I shook my head. "No, sweetie, just my lawyer. Did Mom call?" There was a hopefulness in her voice that was breaking my heart. "No, Em, she didn't call." I saw the light go out in her eyes and I wanted to scream with helplessness. How could Millie do this to her children? Jake, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway the whole time, suddenly spoke up. "You know what? That's enough. No more waiting for her calls, no more hoping she'll come back. She's gone, and maybe it's for the best." Emily and I stared at him in shock. "Jake," I started, but he interrupted me. "No, Dad, listen. We've been living on pins and needles for 3 months. Every time the phone rings, we wonder if it's her. Every time the mail comes, we hope to see a letter from her. But she's not, and you know what? We get by. We get by without her." I looked at my son, and I thought I was looking at a grown man, not a 13-year-old boy. When did he get so mature? Emily started to cry, and Jake, to my surprise, put his arms around her. "It's going to be okay, Em," he said softly. "We have Daddy. We have us. That's enough." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I held back. Instead, I walked over to the kids and hugged them both. "Jake's right," I said. "We'll get through this. Together." We sat on the couch for a long time that night, watching old family movies and remembering the good times. But now those memories didn't hurt as much as they used to. They had become part of our past, something that had shaped us, but no longer defined our future. Before I went to bed, I went into Emily's room. She was sitting on the bed, holding a picture of Millie. "You know, Dad," she said without looking up, "I still love Mom, but I don't expect her to come back anymore." I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "And that's okay, sweetheart. Loving her and moving on aren't mutually exclusive." She nodded and put the picture in the nightstand drawer. "Good night, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, Em." Walking out of Emily's room, I looked in on Jake. He was lying on the bed, staring at a book. "Hey, champ," I called out. "Can I come in?" He nodded, putting the book aside. "You know," I said, sitting down on the edge of his bed, "I'm really proud of the way you supported your sister today." Jake shrugged, but I could tell he was pleased to hear that. "It's just, I'm tired of seeing her suffer because of Mom," he said quietly. I nodded. "I understand. But remember, it's okay for you to be sad or angry too. You don't always have to be strong." He was silent for a long time, and then suddenly he asked, "Dad, do you still love Mom?" That question caught me off guard. I thought for a moment, trying to formulate an answer. "You know, Jake, love is a complicated thing. Part of me will always love your mom for the years we spent together, for you and Emily. But that love that was between us as husband and wife, I think it died the day Mom decided to leave." Jake nodded, as if understanding. "Thanks for being honest with me, Dad." I patted him on the head. "Always, champ. Now get some sleep. We have a big day tomorrow." Leaving Jake's room, I walked down to the living room and sat in my favorite chair. The house was quiet, but the silence didn't seem oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. I pulled out my phone and opened the text message from Millie that she'd sent a week ago, the first one I'd gotten in a while. I signed the papers. "I hope you're doing well." I stared at those words for a long time, trying to feel something. Anger, hurt, longing. But I felt nothing. Millie had become a part of the past, a chapter in a book we'd closed. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Yes, we still have a long way to go. The children will have moments when they miss their mother, angry at her or at me. I will have days when the loneliness seems unbearable. But we'll get through it. We're already coping. I stood up and walked to the window. It was beginning to dawn outside, the first rays of sunlight coloring the sky a soft pink. A new day, a new beginning. I took a deep breath and smiled. We're going to be okay. We're going to be happy. Not because of Millie or in spite of her, just because we're a family. A small, wounded, but strong family.